BB48 African family, welcome to another edition of the African Liberation Media Show. I'm your co-host, Brother Amos, here with my esteemed elder, Baba Makaru. How you doing tonight, Baba Makaru?
BB48, brother. Every day's a blessing. Every day's a blessing. Glad to be here.
Shay, as we deliver this news and information, we have to keep in mind that every day that passes in this country, people's rights are being taken away for what they say. Specifically, when we look at the recent events of Scott Ritter, who had his passport uh, taken away at the airport recently as he was boarding a flight to get ready to go to Russia. Or he was trying to board a plane, wasn't even allowed to get on the plane. Authorities approached him and asked him what his name was for him to confirm his identity. And once he did so, they gave him his bags, took his passport, didn't tell him why his passport was being taken. When he asked who was responsible for his passport being taken, he was told it's the U.S. State Department.
Mm.
So for everyone who thinks that the democracy or the rights of American citizens are under threat from a presidency of Donald Trump, we can clearly see in real time what we've witnessed over the past 3.5 years of Joseph Robinette Biden. What his administration has done is nothing short of fascism, in my opinion. And for someone to be a person who was once a highly regarded military official, weapons inspector, like Scott Ritter was, much of his dismay came when he announced to the world that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction based on his investigations. Then he was deemed to be an enemy of the state. And Scott Ritter has been very vocal about the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza. And this is an example. This is an example of how white people who are being targeted in the 21st century now feel the same punishments and rights being taken away, or rights who didn't even exist in some cases, that black people felt in the 20th century. Even in the 21st century, just recently, we know that Amali Yashatella had his home, him and his wife had their home raided by the FBI due to his comments about Russia. And what they'll try to frame both Ritter and Yashatella, they tried to frame frame Yashatella as is a Russian supporter or someone who is a Russian agent. Just because someone disagrees with the United States policy, and just because they may agree with Russian policy, does not make them a Russian agent. But if we go back to the early 20th century, we can remember, black people like Paul Robeson and W.E.B. Du Bois, who had their passports revoked or confiscated or taken away, the ability to travel taken away.
Mm-hmm.
W.B. Du Bois, who was once, just like Scott Ritter, considered to be someone who they would look upon as an ally, later they looked upon him as an enemy. And as Baba Makaru I was discussing right before we got on this call, he remembers the times when Kwame Ture was prevented from traveling to countries in the Caribbean, and at one point almost missed the opportunity to travel to Jamaica because they tried to stop him from traveling there, even though he wasn't banned from traveling there. So there are multiple examples of black people being banned for what they say or what they think, what they believe, and what they speak in public. People like Farrakhan have been banned from countries. People like Ayo Kamathi have been banned from countries like Bermuda. So anytime you are saying something that the state does not agree with, uh, you don't have any rights. They can do whatever they want to do to you, which has been proven. So what we think we have in our rights as the Constitution is really only a conditional agreement between the United States government and United States citizen. It's under the conditions that you go along to get along, but as soon as you step out of line, then they'll exercise their authority and their power to quickly take your rights away.
No question about it. We remember Malcolm being barred from entering France in, I think it might have been in January of 1965, January or February, something, may have been right before his assassination. But you are correct. You know, when we did a podcast after Biden was elected, and our prediction was that Biden would be able to accomplish more in terms of censorship, in terms of taking the rights away from people, quote unquote, on the left than Trump would. So we anticipated that a lot of what we are seeing today, particularly in terms of censorship, would take place. We didn't predict the conditions under which they would take place. We had no idea that the conflict in Ukraine that started in 2014 would escalate to the level it did. Of course, we are aware of the numerous outbreaks of violence in the world's largest open air prison known as Gaza. We knew that the potential was always there, but we couldn't anticipate that things would reach this level and that it would generate the kind of opposition that is generated, because you couldn't call a person like Scott Ritter a leftist or a radical or anything like that. I mean, like in the case of Robeson and Du Bois, who and I think Claudia Jones weren't allowed to travel to the Bandung conference because they didn't want them over there articulating a message that would expose what the United States was doing to people of African descent in 1954, 1955. So they barred them from traveling. So here's a decorated, here's a U.S. officer, guy that's put his life on the line. United States Marine Corps became a weapons inspector for the United Nations. Did the inspections to see whether Saddam Hussein, who, oh, by the way, when Saddam Hussein was fighting, when he was helping the North Atlantic, the United States and the tribes of the North Atlantic, when he was helping them during his 8-year war against Iran, who supplied him with the chemical weapons that he was using on the Iranians? The same people who killed him. Okay? I mean, this is why anybody that tries to form an alliance with with this empire is out of their mind, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. And so Scott Ritter's greatest crime when he became persona non grata, despite his years of military service, was when he went public with his information based on his visual inspections. This is not Colin Powell holding up a vial of baking soda or whatever he had in it in the United Nations. This is what he saw based on his experience as an officer who had spent years studying these what were considered to be weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons and everything. He traveled to Russia, for example, when as part of the various nuclear treaties that we had with Russia to see if they were abiding by the nuclear proliferation treaties that some more common sense presidents had compared to the political moron we have in the White House right now. And so as a result of his experience, seeing his comrades being sent off into this asinine global war on terror by George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Colin Powell, Donald Rumsfeld, and that whole Condoleezza Rice and that whole crew of war criminals. This is what really turned a lot of these guys who served in the U.S. military, served in U.S. intelligence services. This is one of the things that really bothered them, the fact that their friends, people they had served beside, you know, and those like Captain Matthew Ho, who's, you know, served in, I think, Afghanistan and in Iraq. I believe he's also a guest on Judging Freedom, where Scott Ritter is often with Judge Napolitano. These guys were seeing their friends getting killed. They were seeing people being crippled for life. They know about people that have returned from the global war on terror with PTSD, who, you know, killed their wives and families and committed suicide. All of these kinds of things. For what? Why? And so, you know, they have become, you know, radical in a sense, not people who are necessarily opposed to the very being of the American empire and what it stands for, but they do want to see change, because they understand that what's going on in this world right now, just like former CIA officer Larry Johnson, who actually did manage to go, they were all going to this conference in St. Petersburg, Russia. St. Petersburg, formerly known as Leningrad, a place that Hitler surrounded for 2 years and starved about 800,000 people. Anybody that studied World War II and realized that Russia lost 17 million people, the United States lost less than 500,000. Anybody who thinks these people are going to roll over and play dead is out of their minds. It's not that they want to destroy humanity, but they're not going to sit back and just let the United States drop bombs on them like Japan. So what these guys are really doing, in my opinion, what they all doing is they're trying to save humanity from this madness. But because the things that they say are raising people's consciousness against the military-industrial complex, or what Eisenhower called the military-industrial congressional complex, and some people have even added to that censorship complex. I think we'll do a program on this at some point about how they're using these universities to be at the forefront of this censorship that's taking place. These guys are trying to save the world, and because of that, they've become persona non grata. So the American public should be up in arms, but this is the problem when you have a society that's just driven purely by individualism and materialism. People say, well, you know, he shouldn't be speaking out. He shouldn't be saying anything. Just be quiet. Just live your life. You know, you shouldn't say nothing. And then they'll label him as pro-Putin, just like they did Yester Shelley and others. Same way they did Robeson. Robeson was pro-communist or whatever. And people will just crawl back into their little safe havens and say, it ain't me. It's not me. But see, those of us who've been in the struggle and know, for example, that, you know, the government has proven to you that they were watching you, spying on you, had a record on you and whatnot. We knew that there's a price to pay. You say you have freedom of speech, but But if you really speak and say things that are a problem to the American empire being able to continue to dominate the world, if you pose a threat to that, it doesn't matter where you saying that, you know, you believe in self-defense like Omawale Malcolm X, or if you saying that you believe in peace like Martin Luther King, you are an enemy. So yeah, you have freedom of speech, and there are consequences. There are consequences for speaking out. So in a sense, you really don't have freedom of speech because you're doing it at considerable risk, including to your life. Now, I'll just say one final thing on this, and that is this. There was a law signed by Barack Obama, I believe it was in December of 2012. It was part of the National Defense Authorization Act. Every year they pass a National Defense Authorization Act, and they just keep increasing the budget for the Department of Defense. And now it's approaching, well, I think if all of the money that was truly counted, it would be over $1 trillion. But I think the official number now is something like 880 billion or whatever. Part of that act, they had a clause in that act that is called indefinite detention without due process. This is the law in the United States. And they say, well, it would only be applied to people we call enemy combatants, you know, foreigners, not to American citizens, but it is the law. And they can use that law any way they choose to. Indefinite means they can declare you an enemy of the state. They can pick you up. They can, if they want to, they can haul you away to Guantanamo or somewhere, to one of their prisons somewhere else in the world. You have no rights, no writ of habeas corpus, no anything. Just totally gone. That is a law in the United States that was signed by Barack Obama, the so-called constitutional lawyer. They wanted to have it on the books just in case things, you know, took a turn. And things have taken a turn. They haven't reached anywhere near the level of the 1960s and 1970s. And what they're trying to do is just stop it because they, you know, they see the potential for what could happen. And this time it might really tip the scales. Okay, so that's basically what's going on here. And but Scott Ritter has no fear. He's not going to stop. You know, he's going to continue to give his analysis of what's going on in the world. And that analysis calls out the American empire for what it's doing. Right now, Joe Biden is clearly the most dangerous politician on the planet. He is pushing this world closer to nuclear war every single day. And everybody's talking about, well, Trump is the greatest threat to democracy. You may not even get to the election. We might not even get to the election because of the things this guy is doing.
Yeah, and it's clear when you look at the total landscape, it's clear that they are terrified of what Russia, China, and BRICS are doing with this potential currency and de-dollarization. Because when you make an order for Ukraine to use your weapons to strike inside of Russia, it's basically you're hemorrhaging and grasping at whatever opportunities you can to try to stop Russia. If they can stop Russia and stop Iran and stop China, then that resets these countries' ability to affect the dollar. It's all related to money. It's always all related to money.
Yeah, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, talking about creating an African currency based on gold.
even when they talk about depopulating the planet and wanted to do all of these different plans to get rid of people, it's related to money and resources. So if you understand how the money works and you understand how their need of the ability to have access to cheap resources and cheap labor works, then you'll understand why all of these congressmen and congresswomen vote for these wars. And then once you understand that, you can look to see who's pushing the entire agenda and who is benefiting the most from it.
Mm-hmm.